The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Carl Jung. Let's begin with this. Your mind is not just the part of you that thinks. It is also the part that hides. Buried underneath your logic, your personality, your strengths, there are emotions, impulses, beliefs, and fears you have pushed aside just to function. That hidden material is what Carl Jung called the shadow. The shadow is not evil. It is not just your rage, jealousy, or shame. It is also your repressed desires, unspoken truths, and unlived potential. It is the side of you that was judged or silenced early on, often when you were too young to fight back. And here's the uncomfortable truth. The more you deny it, the more it controls you. As a psychologist, I can tell you this is not just theory. In clinical practice, shadow dynamics show up in burnout, in addiction, in repeated relationship patterns, in unexplained guilt or anxiety. People do not suffer because they are broken. They suffer because they are split. One part performs while another part is locked away. That internal division comes at a cost. This course is not about self-improvement. It is about self-integration. We are not here to polish your image. We are here to bring back the parts of you you had to abandon and give them a voice. Mastering your mind is not about control. It begins with honesty. The shadow is not the problem. Your silence about it is. Let's change that. Let's get started. Number 1. Your shadow is not evil, but unlived potential. Let's get one thing straight. Your shadow is not evil. It's not a demon lurking in your mind. It's the parts of you that you had to hide in order to survive. And that includes some of the most powerful pieces of who you are. Carl Jung called it the shadow, because it's everything your conscious mind doesn't want to look at. But here's the twist. It's not just your rage or your jealousy or your fears. It's also your brilliance, your boldness, your raw emotions, your instinct to say no, your creative fire, your sexual energy. These are things that often got labeled too much or inappropriate when you were young, and so you buried them. Think about it. Maybe as a child you were told to be quiet, so you suppressed your natural leadership. Maybe your curiosity made others uncomfortable, so you learned to play small. Or you were scolded for being angry, so now you don't speak up when you're disrespected. Those parts didn't die, they just got locked away. That's your shadow. Philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche once said, "You must have chaos within you to give birth to a dancing star." He was talking about this exact thing, the idea that what you hide in the dark might be your deepest source of power. Here's where psychology agrees. Modern research in depth psychology and trauma studies shows that repression doesn't eliminate emotion or drive. It simply buries it in the unconscious, where it leaks out through self-sabotage, addiction, anxiety, or projection onto others. So when we say your shadow is not evil but unlived potential, we mean it quite literally. There's power in the parts you rejected. There's energy in your forbidden feelings. Integrating your shadow isn't about becoming a worse version of yourself. It's about becoming a more complete one. The goal is not perfection. It's wholeness. That's where real peace comes from. When you no longer fight with yourself just to be acceptable. Number 2. Repression is the real villain. Let's talk about repression. The psychological habit of pushing thoughts, feelings, or desires out of your awareness because they're unacceptable. Most of us do it without even realizing. You feel angry, you swallow it, you feel shame, you cover it with a smile. You want something society says you shouldn't want, you pretend you don't. Over time, you might even forget those parts of yourself exist, but make no mistake, they do not disappear. They go underground. Carl Jung warned us clearly. What you resist not only persists, but grows in size. That's what repression does. It turns your hidden thoughts and emotions into landmines buried in your unconscious. You think you're in control, until one day, in the middle of a normal conversation, you explode in rage or anxiety, or you find yourself repeating the same destructive patterns again and again, without knowing why. Let's be honest, most of what we call personality is just a carefully constructed response to repression. Maybe you grew up in a home where showing sadness made you weak. So now, as an adult, you are always cheerful. But underneath, you're disconnected and exhausted. That's repression at work. Or maybe you were punished for being curious or questioning things. Now you play it safe, always following the rules, never asking if they make sense. Again, repression. Philosophers like Soren Kierkegaard believed that despair comes not from suffering, but from not being allowed to be fully yourself. Modern psychology agrees. Studies in affective neuroscience show that repressed emotions often show up in the body, in chronic stress, illness, or numbing behaviors like overeating, overworking, or endless scrolling. Repression is the real villain because it convinces you that peace comes from silence. It does not. Peace comes from integration, from letting all parts of you have a seat at the table, even the ones you were told to hide. If you don't face them, they'll find a way to speak anyway. And usually, not at the right time. Number 3, you project what you refuse to own. Let's dive into something that most people do every single day without knowing: projection. In simple terms, projection is when you take a part of yourself that you don't like or don't even know is there and stick it onto someone else. That annoying trait you see in your coworker, that selfish friend, that arrogant stranger. There's a good chance you're looking at a piece of yourself you've pushed into the shadows. Carl Jung put it plainly: everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. That's not just poetic, it's deeply psychological. When we repress qualities like anger, ambition, jealousy, pride, they don't vanish. We lose conscious control over them, and they start showing up on the faces of other people. Not because those people actually have those traits in excess, but because we're unconsciously looking for them. It's like your mind puts up a projector and plays your internal movie on someone else's screen. Think about it. You might hate arrogance in others, but if you dig deep, maybe you were taught never to be confident. Now, when you see someone fully owning their space, it triggers you. Not because they are wrong, but because you've never given yourself permission to be that free. That's projection. It's like a psychological mirror, except you think it's a window. Philosophers like Jean-Paul Sartre argued that we are constantly avoiding the responsibility of our own freedom. Projection is one of the ways we do that. It's easier to judge than to reflect, easier to attack than admit, I see a part of myself in them. Modern psychology confirms this. Studies in psychodynamic therapy show that people often heal not by fixing others, but by recognizing how they use others to avoid themselves. When you stop projecting and start owning your emotions, something powerful happens. You stop feeling like a victim of other people's flaws. You start reclaiming the parts of yourself you abandoned. That's when real growth begins. When you realize the monster was never out there. It was you all along, and that's not a curse. It's your path to freedom. Number 4, radical self-honesty is the entrance ticket. Let's cut through the noise. Radical self-honesty is the starting point of any real psychological work. If you're trying to master your mind while wearing a mask, you're only mastering an illusion. The shadow does not respond to positive affirmations or carefully curated self-images. It doesn't care how spiritually evolved or emotionally intelligent you look to others. It wants the truth, and not the polished kind. Carl Jung didn't sugarcoat this. He believed that facing the shadow meant facing everything you've hidden. Not just your fears or your pain, but your envy, your entitlement, your manipulation, your resentment. The stuff you'd rather pretend isn't there. He once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." And he was right. Most people spend years building a life that looks fine on the outside while feeling completely off on the inside. Why? Because real honesty is uncomfortable. It shakes the foundation of who you think you are. But here's the paradox. Until you're willing to look at what's real, not what's acceptable, not what's impressive, your mind will remain divided. And a divided mind cannot be free. Let's say you pride yourself on being kind. Great. But if you're brutally honest, do you ever use that kindness to avoid conflict? Do you suppress your anger to maintain your image? That's the kind of truth the shadow deals in. It's not about shaming you, it's about freeing you from your own performance. In philosophy, Socrates said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." Radical honesty is what makes life examined. And in psychology, therapeutic breakthroughs don't come from comfort. They come when someone finally says, "This is who I really am, even if I don't like it." Mastering your mind begins where the performance ends. That moment when you stop trying to fix your reflection and finally turn around to face what's behind the mirror. That's when the work really begins. And that's when transformation becomes possible. Number 5, wholeness is greater than goodness. Let's be honest. Many of us were raised to believe that the goal in life is to be a good person. Be nice, be polite, be agreeable. Don't make a scene, don't be difficult. But Carl Jung saw something dangerously incomplete in this idea of goodness. He believed that when we chase goodness without awareness, we cut ourselves in half. We split off the parts of us that don't fit into the nice image we're trying to project. The anger, the ambition, the messiness, the desires. And what's left is a hollow version of the self. Jung didn't want people to be good. He wanted them to be whole. There's a big difference. Wholeness means you recognize and make room for your contradictions. You know that you can be compassionate and still feel rage. You can be generous and still envy others. You can love deeply and still have moments of selfishness. These aren't signs of failure. They're signs that you're human. Psychology backs this up. Studies show that people who integrate their conflicting emotions, rather than suppressing them, experience more emotional resilience and clarity. In philosophy, thinkers like Heraclitus and even Lao Tzu taught that opposites are not enemies but parts of a unified whole. Light needs darkness, order needs chaos. Let's say you always try to be understanding. You never express anger, but deep down you feel resentment building. That repressed anger doesn't go away. It leaks out in sarcasm, passive aggression, or eventually burnout. That's not peace. That's pressure building behind a fake smile. Jung wrote, "I'd rather be whole than good." And for good reason. Goodness is often a performance. Wholeness is the truth. When you allow space for all parts of you, even the parts you were taught to hide, you stop fighting yourself. That's when inner peace becomes real, not because everything feels perfect, but because you are no longer at war with who you are. Number 6. If you don't deal with the shadow, it deals with you. Let's not pretend the unconscious parts of you just sit quietly in the background. They don't. If you don't face your shadow, it doesn't stay hidden. It starts making decisions for you when you least expect it. Carl Jung warned us about this clearly. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. That's not just poetic. It's psychological reality. The parts of you that you push away, the guilt, the rage, the fear, the unmet needs, do not disappear. They wait. And then they show up when you're tired, stressed, hurt, or overwhelmed. Take addiction, for example. At its root, it's often not about pleasure, but about escape. Escape from emotions too painful or confusing to sit with. That's shadow material. Or think about burnout. You might believe it's just from working too hard, but often it's the result of constantly ignoring your limits to keep up an image of being strong or capable. Again, that's the shadow running the show. And then there's the classic scenario. You're in a calm conversation and suddenly you say something sharp or irrational that shocks even you. That's not you being moody. That's a shadow eruption. The parts you've been denying find a way to speak, often in the worst moments. Philosopher Carl Gustav Caruso, long before Jung, described the unconscious as the true inner power of the mind. Jung expanded that idea, insisting that the more we avoid the shadow, the more likely it is to possess us. Modern trauma psychology agrees. Suppressed emotion doesn't vanish. It becomes stored stress in the nervous system, and over time it hijacks behavior, relationships, even physical health. So here's the truth. Either you face your shadow with courage and honesty, or it waits until you're too tired to fight and takes the wheel. There's no middle ground. Mastering the shadow doesn't mean controlling it. It means understanding it well enough that it doesn't need to scream just to be heard. Number 7. Darkness contains vital energy. Let's be real. Darkness is not just destruction, it's power. Raw, untamed, often uncomfortable, but absolutely vital power. The emotions we label as bad, anger, lust, envy, aggression, aren't mistakes in human design. They're signals, they're energy. And if you know how to work with them, they become fuel. If you deny them, they turn into chains. Carl Jung understood this deeply. He didn't want people to suppress these drives. He wanted them integrated, brought into consciousness, owned, and directed. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light. but by making the darkness conscious. That wasn't just poetic, it was practical. Because when you disown your darker instincts, they don't disappear. They work behind the scenes, influencing your choices, your relationships, your self-worth, without your awareness. Take anger. Most people are either exploding with it or pretending they don't feel it. But anger, when integrated, becomes healthy boundaries. It says, "This is not okay," or "I matter too." Lust, denied, becomes shame and secret behavior. Integrated, it becomes intimacy and connection. Envy, if acknowledged, can guide you to what you really want. A mirror reflecting unmet ambition or unclaimed potential. Aggression, when filtered through consciousness, becomes courage, drive, and assertiveness. Philosophers like Nietzsche believed that vitality comes from embracing the full spectrum of human nature, not just the light. He called it the will to power, not domination, but the creative force that drives life forward. Jung agreed, warning that the shadow is 90% pure gold, meaning what we fear in ourselves often holds our deepest strength. Psychology backs this up. Suppressed emotions lead to chronic stress, passive aggression, anxiety, and identity confusion. Integrated emotions, even difficult ones, lead to resilience, clarity, and confidence. So here's the truth. Your darkness is not the enemy. It's part of your design. If you try to erase it, it owns you. If you learn to speak its language, it empowers you. The choice is not between being dark or light. The choice is between being fragmented or whole. Number 8, you cannot outthink the shadow. This is where many smart people get trapped. They think they can outthink the shadow. They believe that if they read enough, analyze enough, understand enough, they can stay in control. But the shadow doesn't live in your thoughts. It lives in your body, your reactions, your emotional patterns, and it knows how to slip right past your intellect. You might be brilliant, well-read, even deeply self-aware on paper. But when you find yourself overreacting, shutting down, chasing the same toxic relationships, or spiraling in shame, that's the shadow at work. It doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't respond to logic. It responds to repression, emotion, and habit. Carl Jung understood this deeply. He didn't say, "The unconscious is dumb." He said it's autonomous. It has its own intelligence. You can't debate it into silence. The shadow, Jung said, is a living part of the personality and therefore wants to live with it in some form. Meaning, it's not interested in being analyzed to death. It wants to be acknowledged, felt, and integrated. Let's look at an example. Say you pride yourself on being calm, reasonable, in control. You've read all the right books, gone to therapy, maybe even teach others about emotional awareness. Then someone makes a small comment, and suddenly you feel rage, or you shut down completely. You're confused. Your mind tells you, this shouldn't be a big deal, but your body reacts like it's a threat. That's the shadow, the emotional residue of unprocessed experience. It doesn't care about your education. It cares about what you've buried. Philosophers like Antonio Damasio showed that emotion is foundational to decision-making and self-perception. Without emotional integration, reason becomes disconnected, like a map without a compass. So no, intelligence alone won't save you. In fact, it can become a shield. Some of the most together people are secretly the most fragmented because they've built their identity on understanding, not on feeling. To work with the shadow, you have to go beneath thinking, into the body, into discomfort, into contradiction. That's where the real work happens. Not in your theories, but in your nervous system. Number 9. Childhood is the blueprint for the shadow. Let's go back to where it all started. Childhood. Not in a sentimental way, but in a precise psychological way. Childhood is where the blueprint for your shadow was drawn. Long before you could think critically or defend yourself, you were absorbing rules about what was okay to feel, want, say, and be. Those rules didn't just shape your behavior, they shaped your identity. Here's the key: whatever parts of you were not welcomed, mirrored, or understood as a child didn't disappear. They were split off, buried, and stored in what Carl Jung called the shadow. Those buried parts are still alive, And they're often the exact source of your confusion, your repeating patterns, your "why do I keep doing this" moments. Let's say you were punished for expressing anger. Maybe your parents said, "Don't talk back," or punished you for pushing boundaries. Over time, you learned to suppress anger, but that emotion didn't vanish. It went into the shadow. Now, as an adult, you may find yourself constantly saying yes when you want to say no, only to erupt later or burn out. That's not a personality flaw. That's a shadow pattern rooted in childhood. Maybe you were praised for being the good kid, polite, quiet, selfless. So now you can't stop performing. You overextend, overgive, and suppress your needs, because the fear of being seen as selfish runs deep. Again, that script didn't come from nowhere. It was written in the earliest chapters of your life. Jung didn't see this as a tragic flaw. He saw it as a necessary starting point for healing. He wrote, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parents," meaning, much of what you repressed wasn't even about you. It was about surviving in someone else's world. Modern psychology supports this. Attachment theory, inner child work, and trauma research all point to one truth: the unconscious mind runs on early patterns. Until you look back and rewrite that script consciously, you will keep living it, over and over, with different faces, different jobs, and the same emotional result. The shadow is not just a mystery, it's a memory, waiting to be heard. Number 10. You will lose people when you integrate the shadow. Here's a truth that many people avoid when they start doing shadow work. You will lose people. Not because you've become toxic or negative, but because you've become real. Integrating the shadow means showing up as your full self. Not just the version of you that's agreeable, easy, pleasing, or convenient for others. And when that mask comes off, some people will leave. Not because you've failed them, but because you've stopped playing a role that made them comfortable. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But he never said it would be painless. When you begin to reclaim your boundaries, speak uncomfortable truths, express anger or sadness, or stop shrinking to keep the peace, some relationships will shake, and some will fall apart. Think about it. If someone only values you when you're agreeable, who are they really in a relationship with? You, or a version of you that hides your truth? Many people are unknowingly addicted to roles. The helper, the nice one, the always available friend, the one who never complains. Shadow work destroys those roles. Not because you become mean or selfish, but because you become whole. And wholeness includes saying no, holding boundaries, having needs, and expressing darker emotions. Modern psychology backs this up. Systems theory and family therapy both teach that when one person in a system changes, the entire system feels the pressure. The person who grows often becomes a threat to the homeostasis of the group, and that can trigger guilt, shame, or even rejection. But here's the deeper truth. Losing people who only loved your mask is not a tragedy. It's a necessary clearing. When you stop abandoning yourself to keep others close, you make room for real connection. With people who can handle your complexity, your depth, your shadow, and your light. Integrating the shadow doesn't just change how you see yourself, it changes who has access to you. And that's not loss, that's liberation. Number 11. Mastering your shadow makes you dangerous in the best way. Mastering your shadow does something few people expect. It makes you dangerous, but not in a destructive way. It makes you immune to control. It strips away your buttons. It cuts the strings others might pull to guilt you, shame you, flatter you, or manipulate you. Because when you faced your own darkness, owned it, and integrated it, you stop fearing it in others. You stop reacting from wounds. And that makes you powerful in the most grounded, unshakable way. Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." Why terrifying? Because full self-acceptance includes all the parts you were told to hide. Your rage, your desire, your selfishness, your mess. But once you've made peace with those parts, nobody can weaponize them against you. No one can shame you with your own truth. You've already stood in the fire and come out whole. An integrated person doesn't overreact to criticism because they've already had that conversation internally. They don't overextend themselves to win approval because they've stopped outsourcing their worth. They don't fake humility to seem nice. They know their power and they've claimed it. And this kind of authenticity is disruptive. It unsettles people who are still wearing masks. It exposes performative kindness. It challenges systems built on compliance. Integrated people walk into a room and shift the energy, not with noise, but with presence. They trigger people not by being cruel, but by being real. Philosophers like Nietzsche called this the sovereign individual. Someone who lives by their own values because they've faced their inner chaos and built structure from it. In psychology, this echoes self-actualization, the top of Maslow's hierarchy, where a person no longer lives for approval, but for alignment. So yes, mastering your shadow makes you dangerous, not in a way that harms, but in a way that liberates. It gives you the rarest kind of strength, not the power to dominate others, but the power to no longer be dominated by your own fears. Number 12. Shadow work is not trendy. It's sacred and brutal. Let's be absolutely clear. Shadow work is not trendy. It's not a weekend ritual. It's not about mood lighting, crystals, or journaling your way into peace with cute affirmations. Shadow work is sacred, yes, but it's also brutal. It is spiritual surgery. It requires you to sit with the parts of yourself you've spent a lifetime trying to avoid. And it often starts not with a breakthrough, but with a breakdown. Carl Jung didn't offer shadow work as a hobby. He offered it as a necessary confrontation with the unconscious. He said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." Why pain? Because waking up to your shadow means tearing off masks you didn't even realize were part of your identity. It means realizing that the very things you thought made you lovable, your niceness, your selflessness, your composure, may have been coping mechanisms built to protect a self you didn't feel safe showing. This isn't aesthetic healing. It's not the soft glow of doing the work on Instagram. It's waking up at 2 a.m. with a racing heart because you finally admitted something to yourself you've denied for 20 years. It's rage surfacing that you were told never to feel. It's grief over a childhood you now see with brutal honesty. It's shame transforming into clarity. Not quickly, not cleanly, but with blood, sweat, and sometimes silence. In deep psychology, real transformation only happens when the ego, your carefully constructed self-image, is challenged. Shadow work confronts that ego and says, "You are not the whole story." That's why most people run from it. Not because they're weak, but because the truth is heavier than the lie at first. But here's the sacred part. When you do face it, when you sit in the discomfort without reaching for distraction, you begin to experience something raw and holy, a kind of liberation that's not performative, a self-love that isn't built on denial, a wholeness that doesn't depend on being liked. Shadow work is not pretty, but it's real. And in a world drowning in surface-level healing, the sacredness of that realness is rare and priceless. In final words, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Carl Jung. This is not about perfection, it is about honesty. If you have followed the thread of this course, you know by now that shadow work is not some distant theory. It is intimate, it is raw. It shows up in your daily choices, your quiet discomforts, your reactions, your shame, your patterns. And it is not optional if you are serious about becoming whole. Mastering your shadow does not mean becoming fearless or morally flawless. It means becoming conscious. It means you stop outsourcing responsibility for your life to your past, your parents, your triggers, your culture. You stop pretending you are only light. You face what lives underneath. And by doing that, you stop being ruled by what you cannot name. Jung was never offering a feel-good message. He was offering a map for those who were willing to go deeper than self-improvement. His work was rooted in the idea that the psyche is not a problem to fix, but a mystery to unfold, and that our unlived life lives in the shadow. Psychology confirms what Jung intuited. Avoiding the unconscious does not keep you safe. It keeps you small. Emotional patterns that are repressed do not fade. They become symptoms. They drive addictions, sabotage, burnout, and cycles we do not understand. What you do not integrate will eventually show up as fate. But here is the truth. The shadow is not here to punish you. It is not your enemy. It is the unspoken truth waiting for you to listen. It holds your forgotten power, your repressed creativity, your silenced voice. And when you turn toward it, not with judgment but with curiosity, it transforms. This work is uncomfortable, yes, but it is the most honest kind of freedom. Because once you stop hiding from yourself, you stop hiding from life. So no, this is not about becoming a better version of yourself. It is about becoming the real one. That is what it means to master your mind. Not by escaping your shadow, but by making space for it and learning to walk with it. Thank you for watching, and see you in another episode.